like the general idea of wokeness of this is a bottom up movement of the downtrodden. No, it's actually like a movement of like fairly well off elites. Well, we're making life better for the downtrodden and the marginalized. No, like almost every measure we're taking is making their lives worse. I'm improving my own life through my activism. No, like you're causing yourself like severe mental strain and distress and all these things. So kind of opening your eyes to, I think this thing is doing me good, and realizing it's actually doing me harm. It's similar with addiction. Like there's even if you intellectually know like heroin is bad for me or whatever, subconsciously with any drug addict they think this is medicine, this is saving my life.
So thank you for joining me, Ryan. This is so cool because, to be honest, I mean, your work online has really sort of inspired me to start doing some of these interviews and kind of take some of the skills I've learned in counseling and sort of apply them into these broader conversations. And so, uh, I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to be here. Good to talk to. I feel like this the community that we run in. We run in the same circles, and it's good to connect with people that similar mindset.
Oh, dude, yeah. I mean, I think that's a big part of this is like, and I feel like you're in a way like almost a nucleus of sorts, and it's like kind of been really cool to see people kind of come in and the intersection of people like meeting up, and you've been really kind of a true inspiration, and I think like a spark plug for this sort of thing. And yeah, community is so important in this crazy world that we live in. And so tell me a little bit about what you're kind of doing right now and what you've put out into the world for our listeners here.
Oh man, so I had the book series was that took me, gosh, I was inspired to write the book series after my first semester of grad school, and from basically like the end of 2022 and all of 2023 was like just furious research, and then pretty much all of 2024 was writing. I wrote 5 books, and then I realized probably almost no one's going to read 5 books, so I condensed those 5 books into the Woke Mind. So that's the kind of the condensed version, the SparkNotes
Oh,
version of
okay.
the other 5 books. I think it's the most readable as well, because there's a lot of technical jargon, from whether it's psychology technical jargon or postmodernism, that I think just it's more accessible in the Woke Mind compared to some of the others. So I got that, and then I guess it was probably November, maybe December of last year, end of 2024, where I started podcasting, and I had kind of like accidentally gone viral a couple times. And so I had like a little bit more of an audience than I realized. I kind of was just messing around on Twitter for fun. And then I had a couple posts about grad school that had just kind of gone viral. I mean, like James
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay retweeted me, and Wilfred Riley and Colin Wright and Jeffrey Miller, like these like people that I've read like all their books are retweeting
Yeah.
me. And it was like a surreal moment, and so I had like a little bit of, I probably had like 1,600 followers, and I was like, I'm just gonna ask a couple of people that I mess around with on X to come and just have a conversation. So at one point I had my girlfriend at the time come on. I had Tyson Clark, that I just started asking random people, and I started shooting my shot for different people. The podcast kind of just it blew up like way more than I expected. um, I mean, it's been a crazy ride. It's been so much
Ye-
fun. I've had so many great conversations. I feel like even if I had 0 views on any of the videos, just getting to have these conversations, like I don't know if you were like following my feed when I was interviewing Helen Pluckrose, but I was like a giddy schoolgirl,
Dude, yeah.
getting to interview Helen. Like she's like just some of my heroes in this world. It's been so cool to have these conversations. And my big project that I'm working on now is trying to do something with all this footage from all these podcasts. So I'm trying to create a documentary series, like separated out by topic. So that's kind of
Mm.
what I'm working on right now.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. So kind of like cataloging and kind of really trying to organize all this because you've been on, I'm just looking at your YouTube channel, and like starting about a year ago, you've just been on a tear, man. Like you've just have been working hard at this, and it's been really awesome to see and follow. And at times, it's even hard to keep up. You're putting out so much like good content. Like, oh, I've been really sinking my teeth into
I
that.
also
And
learned to limit myself too. I mean, there was a period of time where I was putting out like 6 episodes a week, and I was like, this is not sustainable. First of all, like nobody can watch all this. Second of all, like
right,
I'm driving myself crazy. I'm exhausted.
yeah, and I'm sure there was, like you said, like there's a certain giddiness. There's a lot of excitement that comes into doing this, especially when you're getting the reach and you're getting some good feedback from other people. Like I think that there's a lesson in that too of learning how to pump the brakes for the sustainable future, you know.
Yeah.
Um no, and I it's funny cuz I was looking back and I watched a couple of your older videos of like you holding just you and the mic with like Nietzsche and talking about Machiavelli and that sort of thing. Like I like those. Those are kind of cool too. And so it's really
I'm
kind of
glad you
cool just
like.
to
I feel
see.
like I'm glad you like
Yeah.
that. I feel like those didn't get a lot of engagement, so I kind of stopped those.
No, but I always like to see like I don't know why I always have this. I like people's. I like to track their journey, and that's something that's really interesting. I mean, that's kind of a theme of this show here is to kind of get a feel for where people are and kind of see like how they've got to this point. And
Mm.
so with that being said, take me back a little bit, Ryan. Like, what has it been like? Did 18-year-old Ryan like what was he up to like at the start of maybe your career trajectory? Paint that picture for me.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of high school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. That was like my goal at the time. Pretty early on in college, I got you know drug addiction and alcoholism kind of knocked me out, and I dropped out of college. And I dropped out of college for probably 12 or 13 years. I battled addiction for a number of years. I think I had like this chip on my shoulder, like a scarlet letter, you might say, of like college dropout. Like I'm not smart enough. People are gonna look at me and think I'm an idiot because I'm a college
Mm,
dropout. I don't have this college degree. I had this kind of sense of inferiority quite a bit because of that. And I think that drove me to like read just obsessively. I read so much, but I never felt like I was good enough to go back to college. And when I was probably I got sober New Year's Day 2017, walked out of a hotel room full of drugs and alcohol, and started a new life. It's been a very good life. About 3 years sober, I decided to go back and finish up my bachelor's at Baylor University. Finished in psychology. That's what I studied.
mm-hmm.
It was love psychology. Got a great education there. Um, yeah, and one thing I'll say from just some self exploration is like I don't know if there's any like there yet. I thought if I can just get a bachelor's degree, like then I'll be okay. Like I'll be like
Mm,
even with other people. And then it was like if I can just get a master's degree, and like I can already tell, it's if I'm so established in as a therapist, then I'll be, I think it's kind of coming to a conclusion of like I'm just okay. Regardless of
mm-hmm.
what happens, I'm okay because I think like there's like, and some of this is useful to kind of push yourself a little further, but I think some of it
Yeah.
can be damaging of like I'll never be okay. You know what I mean? That kind of never ending thing. Um, so fall 20, I graduated May 2022 at Baylor, and then I started my master's degree here in Austin, and that was fall 2022. And I remember like this was a lot of this stuff had happened like a lot in the first semester, some of it in the first week of classes. You're having to say your pronouns. Like I'd never done that before. And a lot of this stuff
Mm,
is second nature to some people, but like the first time someone asked you like what are your pronouns, like why are you asking me? It seems bizarre.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then doing a privilege walk. I did a privilege walk for the first time, where it's like basically like if you're a heterosexual white man, uh, you really haven't accomplished anything in life because everything's been handed to you. Is kind of the theme of a privilege walk. I remember it was
It,
in my counseling the culturally diverse. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was gonna. Is that like if you're this like take a few steps forward to kind of
Yeah.
Is that trying to get you to visualize your
You
you
you've
know your
got
inherent
you've got like
privilege
a
or
wadded
whatever?
up piece of paper. Yeah, you've got like a wadded up piece of paper, and there's a trash can on the other side of the room. And it's like, I've never been followed around a store because I was a racial minority. It's like, so I would take a step forward and you answer all these questions. Like at the end of the assignment, if you're like a heterosexual white man, you're right next to the trash can. So you just drop the paper in. But if you're like a black lesbian woman, you're still at the back of the classroom, so you have to shoot the paper. So their accomplishments are actually like a big deal that they accomplished something. But
Mm,
as a heterosexual white man, it doesn't like your accomplishments in life were just handed to you essentially. That's what they're
I
trying to
see.
drive at.
And so, did you just like slam dunk it when you were
Yeah, yeah.
there?
I think my breaking point was early on in my counseling the culturally diverse class. My professor said one of your primary objectives as a therapist is to become a political activist so that you can quote burn it all to the ground. And I'm thinking like where am I? And
Wow.
I went to my professor's office because it kind of bothered me. And I'm still thinking I might have some effect on the way things are run. So I
Hmm.
went to my professor's office and I said, look, I actually was a radical lefty for a number of years. I was a Bernie Sanders guy. I was, Noam Chomsky. I was like far left wing radical, ready to burn America to the ground. Like I did that, Black Lives Matter. I did the whole thing. Um, and I kind of walked away from that because I wanted, first of all, like I feel like I wasn't having any effect on the world except for making myself more angry. And second of all, I wanted to help people one on one because I thought that's how I could change the world. And I came to my
Mm.
professor's office. I told her that I was like, look, do what you want as an activist. That's not really why I came to graduate school. I came to help people like with their mental health. And she said, that's too bad. If you want to be a therapist, you have to be a political activist. And something just like snapped in me at that moment where it's like my number one mission in life is to help people. I work in addiction. My number one mission in
Mhm.
life is to help people avoid overdose and suicide. My number two mission in life is to destroy whatever this is. And so I just kind of went on a tear. Like
Wow.
I was researching, like, what am I looking at? Like, where do these ideas come from? What is the effect of these ideas? So I went through, did all this research, and I started, releasing these books in 2024. January 2025, this year, was when I released The Woke Mind. Yeah, and it's kind of been, yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you work in addictions now,
Yeah,
is that
yeah,
correct? Are
yeah.
you
I've been working in addictions for probably, I mean, off and on for, gosh, 12 years, something like that. As
okay?
tech and various other different roles. So just starting to step into the clinical side of things.
Right. Okay. Well, because at least in Ohio, there's where I'm from, there's like sort of two tracks. There's the clinical counseling, but then there's also like the substance and substance rehabilitation counselor route too. I didn't know if you were that kind of going into more of the clinical
So
side,
we
or
have
maybe it's
what's
different.
called, yeah, we have, it's called the licensed chemical dependency counselor here.
Yes,
And the
that's
reason I
the.
didn't go that route is because I feel like pretty much all addiction has some kind of mental health issue underneath it, like the picking up a drink, picking up a drug. That's kind of a symptom of some deeper underlying problem. So that's why I wanted to go, because I assumed you learn these type of things in grad school, like how do you treat this kind of stuff? And I was very wrong about that.
Yeah, yeah, and which is too bad because I think it's a missed opportunity. I know for my program, for counseling, we did have an addictions course. There was one we did take one course on addictions that was required, but I kind of wanted to. So you struggled with your own addiction, kind of as a
Mhm.
precursor to all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, has that sort of been an inspiration? Is that kind of part of your story here of why you're maybe on the other side of things now and trying to like trying to show people that there is a other ways to live?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. 2014, I was about 2 years sober in 2014. I was trying to get things together, and I had a number of. I mean, I've probably had over 100 friends pass away from overdose, and it's all been fentanyl basically. It's
Mm.
we used to say before we really knew what fentanyl was, he got a bad batch. It was heroin, but he got a bad batch. But it was fentanyl. Um, and I had that summer of 2014, probably had three very close friends. Two die of overdose and one die of suicide. And it shook me up. These are like my best friends in the world. Like it felt like I lost my core support system overnight. I was pretty distraught. I was dating a woman. I thought I was going to marry her. And she said, you're not the man I fell in love with, because I was depressed instead of happy and cheerful. And that made me more depressed. And then I ended up losing my job. And then I ended up relapsing. 2015, probably summer of 2015, I had two suicide attempts. I was in a bad spot. I was in a very dark place. And I'm watching more and more friends die. And I just wanted to crawl in a hole. I was just, it was incredibly depressing. And I think, when I walked out of that hotel room in New Year's Day 2017, I'm scrambled. I'm trying to figure out like what in the world's going on. I was a couple months shy of my 30th birthday, and I already had liver damage from drinking so much. It was rough.
Wow.
And I'm trying to make sense of my life, like where do I go from here? I had no clue. And I think what gave me some type of sense of purpose is I'm not going to crawl in a hole anymore. I'm going to fight back. And I can't save Mikey and Scott and Brad and Chris and Tom. I can't save them, like they're gone. But I can save people like them, or at least I can help people like them, And that's what kind of gave me some inspiration. And I was, before I was kind of obsessively trying to take down wokeness, I was obsessively studying psychology and addiction and neuroscience and trying to understand like why people get addicted, how people become unaddicted. And in my psychology and neuroscience and all the stuff I studied in undergrad, I mean, it was very rigorous. Professors were very knowledgeable. They really cared a lot. I mean, I was like the ultimate like teacher's pet nerd, sitting on the front row constantly with my hand up. I'm in my professor's office, except for a lot of that time was during COVID. So we're like doing Zoom calls. And I found out like you can just schedule times with professors who aren't your professors. And so I'm scheduling, just Zoom calls or meetings with all these professors who I wasn't even taking, because I was hungry to learn. I wanted as many tools as possible because I'm fighting a beast, and I go from undergrad to grad school, and it was a completely different. Most of my professors were right out of school. They just kind of pushed them right through school. They had almost no knowledge of psychology or counseling. It was pretty much what little knowledge they had revolved around social justice, so I still was trying to keep up the same pattern of sitting on the front row and raising my hand, but like they couldn't answer any of my questions for the most part, or they'd redirect it to something social justice related. And I became very frustrated and honestly very angry very quickly. Like I have this chip on my shoulder against addiction. I'm like on a tear, learning as much as I can to try to help people whose lives are in jeopardy every day. Like working at a treatment center is not like working at, some clinic on the affluent side of town where it's like, some, not to throw stones, but a little bit to throw stones. Some suburban wine mom chipped the nail. You know what I mean? Like that's not the clientele that I work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the people I work with, their lives are in jeopardy every day. Like this is a very serious deal. And I felt like my professors were not taking this seriously. And quite frankly, it really pissed me off. And that's kind of what drove me to like, whatever this is that's leading to what I'm seeing in grad school, it has to be destroyed.
Yeah, so and that tends to be your I can see that as like an overarching pattern, like when something lights the fire in you, like you want in on that. I could totally see you being the student at the front, like just trying to, kind of how you're doing this whole podcast thing on your, on your channel now is you really see the fight for you. And I think honestly that's sort of an underrated way to get meaning in life is the fighting, that fighting spirit that we have as humans, and fighting for a good cause, right? I think that's super super important, honestly. And do you so what has that experience kind of, in a summary type of way, like what do you think it is that leads people to to fall into addiction? You know, whether it's from your own experience or like just from your what you've learned. Like, is there like a fundamental essence to this?
I have like kind of a it's like a 4-layer deal is like my way of conceptualizing it. Um,
Yeah.
so the top layer is like the body itself, behavior. I like the addiction is like me reaching out, taking something, putting it in my body, right? Very simple, like Skinnerian, type of like behaviorism.
Mm-hmm.
So like this level of addiction is like Nancy Reagan, just say no, just don't drink, just don't take a drug, right? The problem is like the layer under that is like cognition, the mind. And so I like your mind, if you're like in active addiction, your mind is like coming up with all kinds of rational reasons. When you said you'd never take a drink again, like you were really overreacting. Like I think your wife, your parents, your girlfriend, like they really don't understand what's going on, really. Like I heard a doctor say that a glass of wine is good for your heart. So like this is, so you come up with all these like
Mm.
cognitive reasons, right? Under that is like emotion. So there's all kinds of like clinical language like depression and anxiety that we use for this type of stuff, but you'll hear things like I just was in a funk, I had an ick on me,
Mm-hmm.
or I've talked a lot. This was the case for me. It's the case for a lot of people. Boredom. I think a lot of alcoholism and addiction is people who just are just chronically bad at handling uncomfortable feelings. And so you want to drown those out or change the feeling. And I think with smartphones, we're like a society of people who are having trouble dealing with boredom and uncomfortable feelings because it's kind of like a micro drug in a sense.
Oh yeah.
And then kind of below that is like the spirit or the soul. And in like AA 12-step type stuff, you would say it's like a God-sized hole or a God-shaped hole inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's where kind of like in therapy stuff, you get into like existentialism, like what is this bigger sense of meaning and purpose fueling you? And I think like you kind of hit all 4 layers and like it can kind of work its way up. So like for me, like I had this bigger sense of meaning and purpose. God was like a big part of that drive, but also part of my mission in life for helping people who are like struggling in a similar way to me. So that sense of meaning and purpose kind of overpowers some of those icky emotions. It overpowers those cognitions that are saying it's okay to drink. And then ultimately keeps me from reaching out and taking a substance, if that makes any sense.
Oh, dude, that's I love that. That's yeah. I think that's very intuitive. Uh, it's funny you say this four model like in my counseling office. I work at a college, and I have these four little like stones of earth, uh, air, water, and fire, and I sort of associated those like earth is the physical, air is our cognition, water is our emotional, and then fire is the spirit. You know, the four sort
I
of
like
root
that.
elements. Well, yeah, and so that just kind of like sunk into my like I could totally latch onto what you that little framework you have there. And
Mm.
I think that's so interesting. From your new sort of focus on what we call wokeness, I mean, do you see any parallels there from sort of like maybe a spiritual like lack, or is wokeness trying to fill something? I just wonder if there's a way to connect those in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get into this a little bit in the woke mind, where I think that like not having a sense of meaning and purpose is a huge factor driving social justice activism. Um, people who are like happy with their family and their church, and they go to their kids' little league game, like they're not out like protesting, trying to burn down cities. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This comes from a group of people who are very discontent. And they would probably say, well, there's a good reason why they're discontent because they're oppressed. And the reality is quite the opposite. Like the most woke people are overwhelmingly people with college degrees, especially advanced degrees, people who make over $100,000 a year, and they're overwhelmingly white. So the most woke people are the most what we consider the most privileged people in society. Um, and so it's not like a physical oppression. Like it's an oppression of the mind in a sense. So
Mm.
there's this lack of purpose, lack of meaning, a fundamental sense of boredom. This creates, another thing is like you like the social justice movement attracts people that are a little bit emotionally unstable, a little bit neurotic or anxious, and then they swallow the ideology and it kind of explodes that. It's like those feelings on steroids. So you tell someone like, hey, the whiteness and the patriarchy and the cis heteronormativity, these that you can't see them, but we're going to teach you how to see them. And you need to see them everywhere because every fabric of society is shot through with this oppression and it's lurking around every corner. And until we overthrow the capitalist system and dismantle the patriarchy and decenter the white man, until that happens, like you're fundamentally, you could never be happy. And in fact, you shouldn't, if you are happy, and this comes from people like Herbert Marcuse, Deleuze and Guattari, and some others. If you are happy, that's a symptom that you're being blinded to how bad things are. You're being blinded to the oppression, right?
Hmm.
And so being discontent, being unhappy is actually part of it's built into the ideology. And then you have to kind of channel that energy outward somewhere. And so it's generally is like is some version of calling someone else a heretic, calling someone or something problematic. You're a racist, you're a transphobe, something like that.
So kind of what I hear is wokeness sort of becomes that spiritual. It tries to fill that God-sized hole that like that you said, and not really in a more established like Christianity sense, but in its own sort of ideological religious sort of way. And it sort of comes from the bottom up, like from the spirit to the emotions to the cognitions, and then to expressing in physical behavior. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to contrast it a little bit with Christianity. Is like Christianity is like very solution focused, like God's the answer. So one of the things my pastor talks about a lot is Psalm 23:1. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. I shall not want, I lack nothing, right? That's very like God is the solution. Like there's no reason for me to complain. Like, everything the creator's provided for me. Social justice ideology, particularly rooted in critical theory, would completely reject that. So Theodore Adorno was a famous critical theorist, the Frankfurt School, and he had this term. He said we have to reject actionism. We can't be focused on taking action. We have to focus on how problematic everything is. Call out problems. Robin DiAngelo, author of White Fragility, like a contemporary race critical theorist.
Mm-hmm.
She calls it solutionism. You can't be out looking for solutions. We have to point out problems, right? So it's kind of the opposite of that Psalm 23:1. Rather than like I have a solution and I lack nothing, it's kind of everything's a problem, and we should not even try to pay attention to any solutions.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that, to be honest. The solutionism as a as a problem. That's so interesting.
They
Sort
would
of
say it's like a white way of thinking.
right, right. And I don't know. What do you see as kind of the way to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, in the woke mind, the way it's framed is kind of like the forces of evil are like critical theory, postmodernism, like irrationality, what I call third and fourth wave Marxism, essentially. And the forces of good are like Enlightenment rationalism, liberal democracy, the scientific method. And I would still say I'm a fan of Enlightenment rationalism, liberal democracy, and the scientific method, but I don't know that's sufficient. And I think that's gosh, I'm getting out of my scope of what I've done research on. I've been thinking a lot lately of like you can't expect people to be rational if there's no foundation. If people are like kind of moving every way the wind blows, they're just naturally it'd be like trying to shoot an arrow while you're being like on a moving boat or something. You know what I mean?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And like for me, like that foundation is Christianity. And I think that gives me a solid anchor, like a solid core to implement like the scientific method. Um, but like you know, Stalin's gulags probably had a lot of science in like how they were made, or like, there's a joke about Hitler, the trains ran on time. Like there's scientific ways to carry out like very bad societies. And I'm trying to think like
Mhm.
what has to come underneath that. Kind of like I was saying with addiction, like what's the core basement level thing to plant yourself on? And I know for me, like it's Christianity, but also I see a lot of like Christian nationalist type people where it's like, let's enforce this with the state. And like kind of the classical liberal in me is like, whoa, like red flags there, alarm bells going off. So I think like you have to have a culture. I mean, I've talked to Dr. Danny Solokowski a number of times about birth rate decline. There's all these kind of things that are faltering in our culture. And I guess in my mind, I want people to kind of wake up to how much of a problem certain things are, like wokeness, for instance, without the state forcing it on people.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's a tough position because I don't think people are naturally going to do a lot of that on their own, and it's going to make something like proto-fascism more appealing to some people, because we have like a decadent, degenerate society in a lot of ways, and it would be easy for someone to sell this message of, have you seen the memes of remember what they took from you?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
have.
people are selling like this kind of mythical time of America past in like 1950s or something, and it's like things were all perfect and rosy back then. And if we have like X amount of like heavy-handed state action, we can give it back to you. And I think even if we did, heavily, heavy state action, I don't think a lot of those times are coming back. Like we live in a time of the smartphone. We live in a time of AI, and it's just like the 50s aren't coming back. Like small town America is not coming back. Like I think we have to grapple with that. I'm totally rambling right now. Sorry.
No, no, it's no, it's I think that's all that's very interesting. Like I agree with what you mean about like the found we regardless of what those blocks are, like you don't want to be living with quicksand. You don't want to be trying to
Mm,
build on quicksand. It's got to be something fundamental and foundational. And I think people have different I think there are different blocks that are more solid than others, you know. Christianity is a pretty solid block. I've seen people develop really sophisticated things about like Platonic realism, like
mm,
metaphysical realism, for example. You know, other sort of more enduring religions. I tend to take a more perennial view on these sorts of things. Like, and what I mean by that is trying to see the the golden thread through all of the enduring things.
mm,
And I think that's a much more reliable way to build a foundation. And so
mm,
I do see that that should probably be a goal for us as a society, is to find our blocks that actually can hold something and and be able to kind of create probably a world where those blocks can all like sort of link up and they don't swallow each other and that sort of thing in the moving quicksands. One other thing you point out, and this is something I think about, in I think it's psychology's, I think it's the flaw maybe of modern day of I don't think scientism, I don't think science is enough, right? I think there's you always have to pair it with like what is, and that's science, and then what ought to
mm,
do. Like you can't have
yeah.
one without the other, right? And like you kind of alluded to, like you can kind of use science to go in either direction of good or evil, but it has to have a certain, it has to be coordinated with what we ought to do. And I mean, I think about this in terms of like working with clients, of like kind of every move and every communication we do with a client, it has a bend of values or morality into it. And I know people get like sort of icky about that, but I think it's true. Like whatever we prioritize to even say is an expression at some level of what we think ought to happen. I don't know. Like, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, gosh, I feel like so I unpacked a lot of postmodernism in the book, and I feel like we've had this like when I was probably my first time in college, like 05, 06, 07, something like that.
Mm,
Kind of one of the slogans that people would say is like no judgment. I'm not
yeah.
judging you. And kind of like the implication was I don't want to judge you because I don't want you to judge me because
Yes.
I personally don't plan on living my life according to any kind of coherent or consistent moral code, right? So this is kind of like the postmodern relativism, and I think this. And I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Andrew Hartz. You know, postmodernism is not actually relativistic. So it's like you have your truth, I have my truth, all this kind of stuff, but that's really just the opening hand. Like the reality behind that is like they actually do have an absolute truth that they're pushing, and it's really just kind of like Marxism on acid. It's like what kind of postmodernism is pushing, this whole like live and let live, like we all have our own truth, like that's kind of it's really disingenuous, but our society kind of swallowed that idea of like kind of like let people do. I think to some extent, like you shouldn't like I think we mistreated gay people very badly for, like for a long time. That's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's like a good like way to enforce your morals. But like at the same time, like I think it's okay to have morals and say some things are better than others. Like, um, I think certain like sexual norms or gender norms or just like some ways of life are better than others. And I think it's okay to say that. And I think like coming from a Christian perspective, I think that the embodiment of what Jesus taught is in I think it's John chapter 8, where the woman's about to be stoned to death. Like everybody walks away because they're all sinful, and he says,
Mm-hmm.
"I don't judge you either." And then he says, "Now go and sin no more." And I think that combination is like how Christians should live their lives. Like, don't judge people, don't condemn people, but also stand for truth. Like, don't accept just like deviant or whatever kind of like all this kind of decadent type of behavior in society. Like, you don't have to like, hey, OnlyFans is okay and like Pornhub is okay. Like, no, it's not. Like, I don't think it's okay, but I'm also not trying to like persecute you. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's sort of the high level nuance that I think is needed to sort of thread that, because um I think they kind of use good faith caution that people have of like,
Mm.
I don't want to impose, and that's sort of where I think a lot of this stuff kind of they sneak their way in through that hesitation, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and are you familiar with Integral Theory by Ken Wilber at all? Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. I've got a couple of his books sitting on my shelf. Yeah. Yeah.
I I mean, I think he has like the altitudes of development, right? Where it's like orange is really values rationality and science and individualism, democracy, and then the next kind of altitude is postmodernism, like where you value pluralism and equality,
Mm.
right? And relativistic and sensitivity is valued. But then there's the integral stage, which he calls teal, and that sees the natural hierarchy and the systems of systems that are at play, and it's able to sort of hold these multiple perspectives. And
Mm.
I don't know, I think that's sort of a useful way of viewing that, is like, if we get to a certain level of development, we can see that there are a natural hierarchy in the whole world, and it has nothing to do with hatred. It has nothing to do with it just is. It is what it is in that sense. And I see a lot of our culture war battling between those bottom two.
Mm.
And I don't know. I think good therapists are trying to get to that integral stage of seeing the systems of systems, seeing the different perspectives, how they're all like all the different threads of truth that are trying to be expressed. And I don't know.
Do you know what spiral dynamics is?
That kind of goes along with that. I'm not like super versed in, but I've dabbled
Yeah.
in that.
it's kind of an application, I think, of Wilber's theories. But I had a guy on my podcast, Tyson Clark, and we had a deep dive into spiral dynamics. And to me, it's kind of like I think you called it the teal stage, but I'm not as familiar with it. But like, you may say like this is a problem where I need the blue level. So like, you could have a situation where it's like, yes, we do want some, postmodern level or whatever here, because we want more, social equality or whatever. And then say, hey, I think our immigration policy is too open right now. We need to move back to blue level. So it's like almost instead of like sticking in one level and saying I'm at the highest level of development, you see it as a toolkit where you use different tools at different times.
Yes, no, exactly, and that's sort of the way I view it is like they all have their pros and cons. I mean, like the base, the egocentric one, like one of the first one, that's really helpful when you're hungry and you need to go get food.
Mm.
You need to be,
Yeah.
you need to like, exercise your egotistical self to get some of those basic needs met, for example. But no, I think that's a great example of that. Okay. So Ryan, I'm curious of where I'm actually curious right now in your internship. Where are you working still? Are you kind of staying with addictions?
Yeah, I'm at a rehab center.
Okay. Is that kind of where you plan on being long term, or are
Yeah,
you
that's
open to? Is that where your heart is still?
I'm open to other possibilities, but that's definitely like where my heart is. Like I would definitely want to stay in the addiction space. And I mean, the place I'm at right now, I love it. It's a good spot.
Nice, cool. I'm glad you found a good spot. That's not always easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I work at a college, and in like so I I'm working with all 18 through 22, 23-year olds, and I'm surprised at the variety of issues. Actually, I thought it was going to be a little bit more narrow, but gosh, these students find a way to keep me on my toes. And on the tap of addiction, man, I think smartphone addiction. I don't even have my smartphone on me because I put it in the other room. I think there's something about that, like it's so understated, and it's amazing talking with some of the Gen Z students of today, and we have these mind-blowing moments of like, wow, like I don't have to be attached to this thing. Like it's almost like when we talk about it and we explore like their behavior, it's so unconscious the way they use their phones. And what I think a big thing that they get, the big thing that I see is they're uncomfortable with boredom, and thus they lack a certain creativity and adaptability, and their resilience becomes weakened because they use their phone as a crutch. And I don't know what do you have any thoughts about that? Like, because I think that is sort of the modern drug, and Gen Z is drinking less, but they're on social media, they're doom scrolling more, and
Hmm.
it's very fascinating to kind of see that dynamic firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I was just listening to a podcast earlier today. It was Jonathan Haidt on Jordan Peterson's podcast. And
Oh,
Jonathan
that'd be a
Haidt
good.
recently wrote a book. Oh yeah, I would recommend it. Jonathan
Okay.
Haidt recently wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. Anxious Generation,
Mm-hmm.
about like how smartphone addiction is driving like anxiety in young people. And man, it's like microdosing a drug, like constantly, just for that drip 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 for like 16 hours a day every day. um I mean, yeah, it's just. And I think I got a buddy, Greg, who he's going a year. I think it's January. It's been like the beginning of the year with like zero technology, like no screens basically.
Mm.
And one of the things he said is like you naturally have these like anxieties of daily life that you kind of grow by pushing through. And it could be just the boredom of waiting in a doctor's office, just little things that you're forced to push through this little discomfort. And it kind of grows your handling discomfort muscle in your brain, basically. And if you have like your phone, it's like a get out of boredom free card just constantly. but it there's like a tolerance, like a drug tolerance where like you can do a lot of drugs and you won't get high because like
Mm-hmm.
you're just built up so much tolerance. But also like that muscle, there's like a rebound effect. If your phone dies, like people panic if their phone dies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I can't handle this boredom. This boredom is like an existential crisis. Like it almost feels like my life is in jeopardy if I have to be bored for 10 minutes.
Yes, totally. And I just think that's in the world of addiction. It's so. I think it's underrated. I think people like Jonathan Haidt are trying to bring a lot of awareness to that. Um, but I think it really is kind of catastrophic for people. And I also, I guess part of one of my like driving philosophies is I'm very skeptical of things that try to narrow our existence and to kill our creativity. And I think the smartphone does both of those things. It puts us in a box, and it also kills our ability to, like you said, like adapt through those boredom moments of boredom or moments of uncomfortability. And I think the same goes for super rigid ideology and or scientific, technocratic policies in that way too. I see this crunch happening. That's our existence is trying. We're trying to get boxed in a way, and I'm very skeptical of that. And I think that's something that drives me in a way is to talk about some of these things and reveal some of the problems associated with that. So with that being said, I'm curious, Ryan, in terms of like kind of pivoting to men, masculinity, mental health, would you say as a almost a fresh almost done with your graduate training, would you recommend men getting in the field? Or do you think they should turn around and run the other way? Like what's your take on that?
Man, I that's going to depend on each individual person. I
Yeah.
would say if you are, I mean, it's like it's just such a highly feminized field. Like I won't go there with that story. Um, but it just you have to be ready to put up with some stuff, you know. And so one of the things I talked to with Dr. Michael Olin of Critical Therapy Antidote is just like being a man in graduate school generally, but especially for therapy, for counseling, like you have to be ready because first of all, like you're a minority and it's generally like there's a suspicion of you to begin with. And so there's like this natural antagonism towards you, but also there's an assumption that you might be the aggressor, right? So you have to constantly, anytime you speak, like soften your voice, make yourself smaller. Like there's this fear that you might scare one of these women in the program with, even inadvertently, just like I have a different opinion on that diagnosis, right? You know, a lot of people, one of the things I do is like I have to run through my mind, how could this potentially be offensive? There's one, this is a few semesters ago, where it's like, what should be the recommendation for this client or something like that. And I want to say exercise, because exercise is like there's a ton of evidence for exercise for depression and all kinds of conditions. And I'm thinking, okay, is it racist to say exercise? I don't think so. Is it transphobic to say exercise? I don't think so. And I was like, okay, I run through the checklist in my head and then I say it, and then somebody's like, well, what if the client's disabled? It's like, I feel like you can never check every box to like know if you're being offensive or not. And so it's like a man going to grad school, just know that you're going to have to be in that environment. You're going to have to bite your tongue a lot, and you're going to have to decide, is that worth it for me?
Mm-hmm. Now it's so interesting because I went to my grad school ran from 2022 to 24. Early 24 is when I graduated, and I don't know if I lucked out but my program was very light on some of this stuff, and I see all these stories, and I can see. I mean, I read the book, The Sioux.
Yeah.
I the
Counseling the
the
culture
main.
diverse.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that was the required reading on that, but even in that, like I felt like our professor did a good job of being fair about that stuff and not drifting into the absurdities of that. And so I I guess that is maybe a silver lining of like maybe not all programs are like this, and I think it does on a granular level. It does depend on the professor who's delivering it, what's their sort of orientation, right? It kind of ties back into like everybody's got a moral compass that they're using, whether that's a relativism or a Christian one, or something in between, of anything in between. uh and I think it's just interesting in that. So you wouldn't not recommend, you'd say,
Yeah, I mean,
man, if you're willing
first,
to go for it, like and
yeah,
a part of me thinks that, you know here's another disconnect I see is grad school is uncomfortable. When I got into the real world and I started to apply to jobs, I was like a golden unicorn. Like I was like they were like, you're increasing our diversity in the office because now we have a male therapist. And I did that. To me, that kind of blew me away. As a white male myself, I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting take. When I got hired, that was sort of what they said, is like, you've just increased our diversity of our office by 50%. I was like, oh, okay, I never thought of it like that, but cool. So I think there is a disconnect between theory and reality, when it gets down to the ground. And if you can kind of slug it out through some of the theoretical abstract ideology and kind of get to the ground, I think there's a lot of meaning in working with people in this role.
yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
go on.
I've interviewed a ton of people, like mental health professionals, and I can say that my program is definitely on the worst side of things. So not all programs are as bad as mine, but it seems like pretty much across the board, because of like KCREP requirements, they're all going to
Mhm.
have this to some degree.
Yes, and I think if it probably was up to, if they could have it their way, and by they I mean those academic elites, I think they probably would have a blanket
Mm.
enforced, very cookie cutter in totality in its expression. But luckily we're not fully there yet, and I think that also goes for like teaching, law programs, all sorts of different humanities and human service fields. um no, what I was gonna pivot to, Ryan, is you're probably quite a busy guy doing your grad school internship, doing this podcast, and really like grinding throughout all that. Like, what do you like to do for fun and recreation, kind of
Mm.
outside of this?
Yeah, the two big things is I work out a lot. Working out is like how I get my mental clarity. So like a lot of like weightlifting and work out with my sister. My sister also lives in Austin. We'll like do these boot camps and stuff together. So it's a lot of fun for me. Also, the other one, I'm like super involved in my church. I'm like in my church all the time because it's like a core source of meaning, but also it's like where a lot of my friends are. It feels like home there. So I think one of the recommendations I give to like a lot of people, whether it's like addiction recovery or just like life in general, like plant roots, because I think that's where a
Mm,
lot of people struggle. And that's where I struggled for a long time, is like not having roots. I think you plant roots, you grow.
I like that a lot. You plant roots, and gives you that, at least in some sense, a foundation that we've been talking about, right? Instead of living in a quicksand that's always sort of churning, planting some roots and like kind of establishing yourself. That probably, you're right, that probably does give you a really good foundation. Um, in terms of like exercise, what are some of your things? Are you a runner? Are you a lifter? Are you what do you like to do?
I don't run as much as I should. My sister gets on me for that, but I predominantly do weightlifting. I do a lot of weightlifting. Sometimes I'll do like a yoga class or something like that, or every once in a while a spin class. Sometimes if my sister wants to punish me, she'll take me to Pilates or bar or something like that. So I do a variety of things, but predominantly weightlifting.
Yeah, okay. And, and I think this is a big thing. Do you find that weightlifting comes to help your cognitive faculties or your work
Mm.
ethic or your productivity, for lack of a better word?
Oh, definitely. I mean, two things. I talked to Sasha Ayad about this, who's like a therapist who focuses on like a lot of the gender stuff. And she's big into weightlifting too. And like one is like being strong in body is like a good metaphor for being strong in mind. Like having to overcome this obstacle, like work, overcome, I hit this, whatever my goal was. You have a similar thing cognitively of like learning how to push through, challenge yourself, that kind of thing. And also just like this release. I feel like there's tension that gets stored up in my brain, stored in my body, and I become tense and tight. And you just, release that tension by lifting heavy things and putting them down right back where you found them.
Yes, yes, lift things up, put them down. I I think that is I think people actually fall into a bit of a trap there where sometimes whether it's like they're a student and they're always in the books or they work an office job or you're in sales or finance or a big white collar job that doesn't have a lot of movement. I see people sort of falling into this trap of they think they have to just kind of work more and more and more and almost to the neglect of their body.
Mm.
But I think that the higher level like insight there is if you spend some time investing in your body, that's going to actually improve and make you more efficient, more productive on the mental side of things. And I think they sort of play into each other in a way that
Mm.
maybe is like not it's not immediately intuitive to some people. I've noticed that, especially college students. Like I see a lot of people they get so they get so caught up in getting the grades and they have to study. The idea of like taking an hour out of their day to go to the gym or to go on a walk is like it's really it stokes a big fear in them. And I find a
Mm.
lot of my work is trying to number one like kind of challenge that framework and also get them to experiment with that. Like, oh hey, your friend just started playing pickleball. Like, what if you like went and joined him for a session? Like, you tried it out and then you hit the studies. I wonder like how you would perform. I wonder if your studying would improve. And I haven't been they haven't proved me wrong yet on those experiments that we've done. And so it's been quite fun to kind of do that.
Oh yeah, like I feel like I'm so much more productive, even though you take an hour, like with transportation and shower and everything, it's like 2 hours out of your day, and I'm still way more productive if I exercise compared to if I don't. I mean, exercise is like the number one thing to bust through writer's block for me. So yeah, it's like huge cognitive benefits.
Mm-hmm. Um, okay, we're coming up at the hour, and I wanted to just do one last thing that I haven't fully got. We didn't get fully into is your podcast is called Reality Therapy. Is that your primary orientation to working with clients, or is that sort of a just a title that sort of fits? Or like explain to me, how do you work with clients? Like what is your
So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I'm currently learning, but I'm primarily CBT at the moment. Learning a good bit of IFS at work at the moment, like parts work, which is really interesting to me. I'll probably be like eclectic or integrated, whatever, here in a few years. But like I stick to CBT at the moment because that's what I know, and it works really well for addiction. The title reality therapy, it's kind of a double entendre. One is a shout out to William Glasser reality
mm-hmm.
therapy, which I love. I love that style of therapy. That's certainly integrated into what I do for sure. But the other kind of double meaning is reality itself can be therapeutic. Like just acknowledging and accepting and opening our eyes to reality, that can have like a therapeutic effect.
do, I I totally agree. Like do you have a does an example come to mind when you so people can kind of understand that a little bit deeper?
So sure, I mean, I've talked a little bit about some of it on here, but just like the general idea of wokeness of this is a bottom up movement of the downtrodden. No, it's actually like a movement of like fairly well off elites. Well, we're making life better for the downtrodden and the marginalized. No, like almost every measure we're taking is making their lives worse. I'm improving my own life through my activism. No, like you're causing yourself like severe mental strain and distress and all these things. So kind of opening your eyes to, I think this thing is doing me good, and realizing it's actually doing me harm. It's similar with addiction. Like there's even if you intellectually know like heroin is bad for me or whatever, subconsciously with any drug addict, they think this is medicine. This is saving my life. And just kind of waking up to the reality, this is poison, right? I need to turn away from that. And I think it's a similar mindset of like this ideology that I've ingested is actually hurting me and hurting other people.
I see that. I think that's a good that helps me understand that both of those, well, I mean both of those, and there's many other things. There's all sorts of forces in the world that are trying to distort our connection to reality. Is that sort of at the essence of that?
Yeah. Oh, for
By
sure.
reconnecting with that through, whether that's through our faculties of reason, whether that's through experimenting and trying things like dialogue, introspection, reflection, aligning ourselves back with reality is the same thing as healing.
Mm.
Is that sort of what you're
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like
getting at?
there's from all different directions, there's a push against that where it's like, we'll accept reality so long as it doesn't offend a certain group or so long as it doesn't contradict our ideology. And it's like, no, no, first we have to understand reality, then we figure out what to do about it.
Yes, right. The is and then ought thing. We have to
Yes,
figure out
yes.
really what is going on, what is real, and then what ought we do next
Mm, yeah.
with this new understanding. Yeah. Um, that's sort of been like my approach too. Is I kind of think of it as like we're improvising within reality. When we have to kind of, what I sort of say to myself is like we got to like master the fundamentals of reality so then we can play with the potentials. And like a
Mm,
chessboard is there are limits to, their reality is a real thing. You can run up against it and you'll feel something
mm,
when you ignore it, right? And just like a chessboard or a tennis match, there's a ton of different moves you can make within the bounds of that game. And that game is called life. And that's the kind of the game that we're all trying to play. And I think to play it well, you have to learn the rules, you have to learn the borders, learn all this different strategies. And that's sort of how I view all the different counseling theories and how we can maybe use them with whatever the client is bringing up for us.
I feel like there was a quote by Sigmund Freud. I don't remember the exact wording, but something like, "We all eventually run into the brick wall of reality."
Yes, I think that is Freud. Yeah, I mean, he had the idea of the reality principle, right? And that's sort of
Yeah,
re- related to our ego in navigating the id and the superego and reality. No, I think that is lovely. And so, what do you got coming up in the future? What are you looking forward to? Anything big?
I got two. I got two pretty big interviews next week. I got one with Eric Kaufman, who's a Canadian professor,
Yes.
and then James Lindsay is coming on my podcast. I've been trying to get him for a long time. I'm pretty stoked.
Ooh, that's a big. That would be like a full circle because you said he was like he retweeted you, kind of got you out in the
Yeah, yeah.
out there.
He
Oh
was also,
dang.
when I was trying to figure out what was going on, the first thing I picked up was cynical theories.
Oh, okay. Yes. I mean, I came familiar of James through his channel New Discourses. I watched quite
Yeah.
a bit of his content on YouTube there through New
Mm.
Discourses, which I believe is something that he founded, or at least in
Yeah,
partnership.
that's his
Um,
deal. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So okay, that's so you got James Lindsay coming out. That's pretty awesome,
It's a
man.
big one.
Like,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. Oh man. Okay, well, this has been cool, man. I appreciate you taking the time and kind of laying out sort of how you came to some of these ideas and your sort of lore and origin story. I think that was pretty cool to hear, and it was really cool to see some of your perspectives, man. I'm hoping we could do maybe a part two sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'm really interested in getting over the hump of some of this stuff, of like trying to get towards, I guess, solutions, and kind of carving out a middle way here that doesn't get swallowed up by ideology on either side of things, and trying to stay true to reality. So I think we align in that mission. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
okay, Ryan, I will put your links all in the descriptions, and that will
Awesome.
be all good. So thank you for joining me, and thank you guys for listening, and we will see you in the next video.